Yeah, no, I think, when you think of marketing, there is so much, right? The bigger picture. How much do you put on valuing, getting a new customer data? How much, are you trying to just get impressions out there? I think, marketing as one of the most, developed areas in hospitality over the past decade because of all of these trackings and of the ability to kind of see value, not just from, a direct transaction, but from things such as impression and customer data and acquisition. So I think, this all, makes a ton of sense. And it really plays into the larger picture, which is all good marketing campaigns kind of feed into, the next part of the purchase or the next step that you want to do. And each, it's like an ecosystem. Every part feeds itself. And so I think you did a really great job of kind of setting that up. I guess my question is then, to you is, what should hotels then expect from Meta? How should they level set their expectations and kind of give us a perspective, based on that?
Certainly. So a couple of things you want to look at. We touched on it earlier, the branded versus non-branded search terms, and just understanding that there's going to be a lot of parallels to that when we talk about Metasearch. There are ways to acquire new guests with non-branded, but it's going to have similar performance as what you see in your search engine marketing. Likewise, we also have to realize that conversion rates do matter. Sooner or later, somebody has to book a room, because if they don't, none of the math works. No matter what you're doing to optimize, if somebody doesn't book a room eventually, you're going to be in trouble. Now, one thing that we did do, though, is we took a look at some performance data from 2019, and I emphasize that because everything got thrown a little bit out of whack in 2020.
What happened in 2020, Dean? I don't know what you're referring to.
Yeah, they canceled sports. I think that was the cause of it, really. Prior to that, everything was just fine. So when we look at some of these numbers, though, what we see is that there is different segments, different types of hotels, and I could really break this down even further. These are just some examples. But starting with, one of my favorites is actually airport hotels. And these numbers, by the way, are specific to Google. But the reason I like airport hotels, Google is a very spontaneous buying process when we talk about Google Meta. So I know where I want to go. I know when I want to go there. I've got a pretty good idea which hotel I want to go to. I probably looked for it even. And to me, it's a click, click, book, and I'm out of here. I want to get through this as soon as possible. I'm ready to book now. No better candidate than an airport hotel that fits that description, right? So airport hotels are a really good fit for this. But even with that, we do see a differential between the lower price ones, say under $100. And in fact, in this example, is about $89. Versus over $100. So that's kind of your limited service versus full service. And the conversion rates were fairly consistent between both of those, just over 14%. The cost per click, not a huge gap between them, but where we do see a differential is on that cost of sale. So similar conversion rate, similar cost per click, but my average booking value is significantly different. And so because of that, my cost of sale at that airport hotel under $100 ends up being much higher, and my ROAS in turn much lower, just under a 6-to-1 on that example. By way of comparison, the over 100 category, because there was a little more revenue, a little more meat on the stick, if you will, that ROAS came in above a 9-to-1. So that worked out really well. Now, when we take that outside of the airport classification, this is where it gets really interesting. Looking at the hotels under $75. In this example, though, you'll see my cost per click went down to $1.22. So that's a big difference between what's happening with the airport hotels versus the non-airport hotels. There wasn't as much competition for that bid, and so you could get a lower CPC. Conversion rate was a little bit lower because, again, it's not the same consumer mentality, same demographic, so lower conversion rate, but the click-through rate, very strong. We had a high click-through rate on that. Cost of sale, a little bit higher than I like it. I'd kind of like to see it down below a 13, but still a return on ad spend coming up above a 7-to-1. And so we know those are very good numbers. Now, my real sweet spots come down here when we jump down a line or two to the $150 to $300 range. And what you'll see on there is I've got my cost of sale below an 11%. In fact, at 10.6 and 10.7. So really good cost of sale that we're looking at on there. But one of the things you'll see is that between my under $300 and my above $300 categories, look at my conversion rates. They went from an 8.3% to a 4.4%, practically dropping in half. And a lot of that is because when we start talking about luxury properties, There's still a great place in Metasearch for those, don't misunderstand, but now my sales cycle is a little bit longer, right? I'm not just going in there willy-nilly and saying, yeah, okay, book the hotel, click book, and I'm done. I'm going in there and looking at the pictures. I'm planning my trip, and I've got a longer cycle that I'm going through. So my conversion rates tend to be a little bit lower. But because I've got more revenue there, my cost of sale still comes out very attractive. Where we do have to be careful is when we start looking at that cost per click there, because now we're getting dangerously high at a $4.20 cost per click, which is largely associated with what we're seeing there as the ADRs and the booking values. Last but not least, one of the goals I hear a lot of people talk about is I want to have a high impression share. I really want to get all the volume. And there's very good reasons for doing that. But we have to also understand that it's not necessarily all what you expect it to be. So in the bottom example, we looked at hotels that were above a 73% impression share on Google, looking at their average booking value and all those other numbers. Now my conversion rates suddenly go down significantly. Why is that? Well, because what starts happening when you start increasing your sample and increasing your numbers, there's what's called the law of diminishing returns, right? So case in point, if you started selling a new product, so yesterday you didn't sell any of them, today you sold one of them. Well, that's a 100% increase, right? Let's say tomorrow you sold two of them, or tomorrow you sold one more. Well, now that's only two of them versus the one you had, right? It's not, and eventually that starts leveling off. It's not as much of an increase as it was when you started. And that's just a mathematical thing that happens as you start increasing your volume. So as you get that higher impression share, yes, you get more exposure, but your click-through rate does go down. And your conversion rates will probably go down. So what you want to make sure you're doing is looking at, especially the cost per click, your conversions and your ROAS, understanding your cost of sale and what your goals are. Then I would take it another step as well in understanding what does that look like when I split it between mobile and desktop. Because when we think about those devices, there's a big difference in the performance on them.